Do you ever wonder what secrets are hiding right under your nose? Emily, the young maid with trembling hands, tiptoed through the grand hall of the mansion, clutching a folded letter against her chest, her pulse hammering like a drum. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long streaks of gold across the polished marble floors, but it did nothing to calm her racing heart. Every creak of the floorboards beneath her small feet felt amplified, echoing in the cavernous space. She paused, glancing at the towering figure of Tommy, the Mafia boss, standing near the staircase, shoulders squared, arms crossed, his expression unreadable yet commanding. His dark eyes swept the room, sharp and calculating, as if he could see through the walls themselves. Emily forced a small, shaky smile and continued walking, each step deliberate, careful not to drop the letter. She felt a bead of sweat trickle down her temple, the air thick with anticipation. In the corner of the room, a photograph rested on a mahogany table, its edges curling slightly, showing children playing in the garden. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The resemblance was uncanny, her stomach twisting as the realization gnawed at her mind. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her trembling voice as she set the letter down gently on the counter, glancing up to find Tommy watching her every movement. His gaze lingered, intense, almost piercing, and Emily felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions pressing down on her. A sudden rustle from the curtains made her jump, and her heart skipped a beat as she turned to see a gentle draft brushing across the room. The tension built silently, invisibly, each second stretching longer than the last. She took a hesitant step closer to the table, eyes flicking back to Tommy, whose posture had stiffened slightly, a subtle shift that did not go unnoticed. Emily cleared her throat, forcing words out in a whisper, her hands clasped tightly together. "Sir? I found something," she murmured, voice barely audible, but it carried across the quiet hall. Tommy's eyes narrowed, and he took a slow, deliberate step toward her, the sound echoing in the space, making Emily instinctively take a small step back. The room seemed to hold its breath, every shadow deepening, every light streak more pronounced, as if the mansion itself anticipated what was about to unfold. Emily's gaze fell on the photograph again, and her fingers itched to point, to speak the truth, but fear held her frozen. She swallowed hard, her chest tightening, her mind racing. What would happen if she spoke? What would happen if she stayed silent? A slight tremor in her hand caused the envelope to shift, drawing Tommy's attention immediately. His eyes locked onto it, and a spark of curiosity mixed with suspicion flickered across his otherwise unreadable face. Emily's heart pounded harder, her mind spinning with the implications of what she might reveal. She took a deep breath, readying herself to speak, knowing that the next words could change everything, and yet the fear of the unknown made her hesitate just for a fraction of a second, enough to feel the world tilt around her, and in that suspended heartbeat, everything felt as if it were on the edge of unraveling, waiting for the truth to leap into the light. Emily's fingers trembled as she lifted the envelope, her eyes darting to Tommy, who had taken another deliberate step closer, his towering presence filling the room, the air thick with tension. Every heartbeat sounded deafening in her ears, each second stretching painfully long, and yet she forced herself to speak, her voice quivering. "Sir? I think you should see this." Tommy's dark eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening, and a faint crease appeared on his forehead as he leaned slightly forward, curiosity mixed with a sharp edge of apprehension. Emily set the envelope down carefully on the polished mahogany table, her hands lingering for a moment as though reluctant to release it. The photograph of the children caught his attention immediately, and his eyes widened subtly, the smallest flicker of recognition passing across his face, only to be quickly masked by the calm, controlled exterior he always maintained. A gentle wind rustled the curtains, shifting the sunlight across the room, painting fleeting patterns of light and shadow over Tommy's angular features. Emily felt a jolt of fear and anticipation. The mansion seemed to grow colder, the silence heavy with unspoken possibilities. She stepped back, clutching the edges of her apron, and tried to steady her breath. They remind me of someone," she added cautiously, choosing her words with care, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it resonated loudly in the charged stillness. Tommy tilted his head slightly, an almost imperceptible movement. His muscles taut beneath his tailored jacket. He moved closer, the echo of his polished shoes on the marble floor punctuating the mounting suspense. Emily's chest tightened as she met his gaze, feeling the weight of all the secrets that had been hidden in plain sight. The children's faces in the photographs seemed to hold 1,000 questions of their own, and Emily could not stop the tremor in her hands. She swallowed hard, attempting to summon courage, and added, "I did not know how to say this, but I think you need to know the truth." Tommy froze, the briefest hesitation visible in his eyes, a crack in his otherwise flawless composure, and for a fleeting moment, Emily saw a human flicker of emotion, shock, disbelief, and a haunting curiosity all intertwined. Her mind raced, imagining what would come next, the room shrinking around them as every second became laden with expectation. Tommy's breath hitched slightly, subtle yet audible, as he reached toward the photograph, his fingers hovering just above it before pausing, as if weighing the consequences of seeing what Emily had discovered. The sunlight shifted again, a thin beam illuminating the envelope, casting a small halo on the polished surface, and Emily's pulse quickened, each beat a drum in her chest. She could feel the room holding its breath, the moment stretched taut between revelation and restraint. Tommy finally spoke, his voice low, measured, yet carrying a tremor she could not miss. "Emily, what exactly are you saying?" Her lips parted, words hovering on the edge, the truth threatening to spill, and in that frozen instant, both of them knew that nothing could remain the same, that the next word would change everything, leaving the air heavy with anticipation of the confrontation yet to come. Tommy's eyes locked onto Emily, the weight of realization pressing down on him like a physical force, and for a moment neither spoke, the room vibrating with unspoken tension. Emily's hands trembled, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady herself, trying to find the right words, and yet every second that passed seemed to stretch into an eternity. The photograph of the children lay between them, a silent witness, and Tommy's gaze flickered from the image to Emily, his jaw clenched, a flicker of fear and disbelief crossing his features before being swallowed by his habitual control. "Emily, tell me exactly what you mean," he said, his voice low, steady, yet charged with an intensity that made her stomach twist. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, and finally managed. "Sir, these children. I think they are yours. They look so much like you, it is impossible to ignore." The words hung in the air, heavy and electric, and Tommy's hand twitched slightly, an involuntary gesture betraying the storm of emotions beneath his calm exterior. Emily's eyes widened as she saw a subtle, almost imperceptible quiver in his lips, the slightest raise of his brows, and she knew the impact of her confession had landed. Tommy took a step closer, the polished floors reflecting his movement, and Emily instinctively stepped back, her heart hammering, breath shallow, feeling both fear and a strange, desperate hope. "Why did no one tell me?" he murmured, almost to himself, the words dripping with disbelief and a hint of anguish. Emily's lips parted, but before she could answer, a faint noise from the hallway made her flinch. The world seemed to shrink, the walls of the mansion closing in as Tommy's eyes darted toward the sound, sharp and vigilant. He turned back to her, tension radiating off his frame, and whispered, "This changes everything." Emily's gaze fell to the envelope, then back to him, the enormity of the secret crashing over them both, and she realized the stakes had shifted. No longer was she merely a servant carrying messages. She was now a keeper of a truth that could unravel a life built on control and secrecy. Tommy's hand hovered over the photograph, hesitating, and in that moment, Emily sensed both fear and longing, a complex mixture that made her chest ache. The sunlight through the windows caught the edges of the paper, glinting sharply, and the room seemed to hold its breath, anticipation coiling tight around them. Emily's voice barely broke the silence. "Sir, what will you do now?" Tommy's eyes darkened, a flicker of determination mixed with something softer, almost regretful, and he spoke. "I need to see them. I need to understand." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of decisions that could not be undone. Emily's pulse raced, her mind spinning, as the implication of his choice settled in the air, a fragile thread connecting revelation to consequence. And just as a small smile of recognition appeared on Tommy's face, his phone buzzed sharply on the desk, the screen lighting up with a name that made both of them pause, a name that neither expected, and a new layer of mystery that threatened to deepen the unfolding storm. Tommy's eyes lingered on the glowing screen of his phone, the name flashing insistently, pulling him in two directions at once, and Emily felt the tension coil tighter around them like a steel wire. Every instinct told her that revealing the children's connection had already shifted the balance of power, yet now the uncertainty of what this call could mean pressed heavily on her chest. Tommy's jaw tightened, his breath slow and deliberate, but the subtle quiver in his hands betrayed his inner turmoil. He looked up, meeting Emily's gaze, and she saw a storm of emotions: anger, disbelief, longing, and an almost imperceptible vulnerability racing across his features. "Emily, I cannot ignore this," he said, voice low but edged with urgency. She nodded, her throat tight, feeling both fear and responsibility, knowing that every word she chose from this point forward could tip the scales irrevocably. The photograph on the table seemed to grow heavier, a silent witness to their suspended reality, as the sunlight shifted across the polished surface, catching Tommy's eyes in a way that made them glint with intensity. Emily took a step closer, hands slightly shaking, and whispered, "Sir, perhaps it is time to see them, to understand everything fully." His gaze softened for a fraction of a second, almost imperceptible, and then hardened again, the weight of decision settling on his broad shoulders. He turned slowly toward the hallway, each step deliberate, echoing through the vast mansion, while Emily's breath quickened, anticipation mixed with fear. The wind rattled the tall windows, and the faint sound of children playing outside drifted in, sharp and ironic, reminding them of the lives waiting beyond the walls. Tommy paused by the doorway, hand on the handle, and for a fleeting heartbeat, he seemed frozen, torn between his carefully constructed world and the undeniable pull of a personal truth he had long avoided. Emily held her breath, watching every micro-expression, every subtle shift of posture, each a window into the intensity of his internal conflict. Finally, he exhaled, a slow, deliberate release, and in that motion, the room seemed to shift, the balance of authority and vulnerability tilting, the stakes rising palpably. Emily felt the electricity in the air, a mingling of dread and possibility, and realized that the next steps would define not just what they knew, but who they would become in the aftermath of this revelation. Tommy's hand lingered on the doorknob, his eyes narrowing slightly, and then he said, almost to himself, "I have to see for myself." The words hung in the air, heavy with consequence, and Emily knew that this moment marked a turning point. Every heartbeat that followed was loaded with potential for change, suspense, and the unforeseen, as the mansion itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the door to open and the next truth to step into the light. Tommy paused in the hallway, hand on the doorknob, and Emily felt the air thicken around them, a quiet storm of anticipation that made her chest ache. His eyes met hers, and in that gaze she sensed a shift, a subtle surrender of control, an acknowledgement that the truths she carried had altered the invisible balance between them. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the edge of the envelope once more, hard hammering in her chest, and he did not pull away. The distant laughter of children outside threaded through the room, sharp and poignant, reminding them both of the lives tethered to their choices. Tommy's brow furrowed, and for the first time, he let a crack of vulnerability show, the stern mask softening just enough for Emily to glimpse the man behind the power. "Emily," he said, voice low, deliberate, a tremor barely perceptible but undeniable. "You have placed a weight on me that I cannot ignore, and yet I feel I must trust you." Her breath caught, the words slicing through her nerves and weaving a fragile bridge of connection between them. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, realizing that in revealing the children's likeness, she had stepped into a space of shared responsibility, where their fates intertwined in ways either had anticipated. The sunlight shifted again, highlighting Tommy's strong features, the shadow of doubt still there but mixed with something softer, something almost human. Emily's gaze dropped to the photograph on the table, then back to his eyes, searching for a signal, a sign that he understood the magnitude of what they faced. Tommy's fingers flexed over the doorknob, hesitation and determination dancing across his face. A microcosm of the internal conflict raging within. He stepped back slightly, letting her move closer, a gesture that spoke volumes about the newfound, tentative trust forming between them. Emily's pulse surged, the unspoken acknowledgement of their shared burden settling over the room, thick and palpable. The mansion seemed to contract around them, the polished floors reflecting the quiet tension, each step and breath amplified, and she realized that this was the pivot point where their relationship, and the path forward, would be irrevocably changed. Tommy exhaled slowly, a controlled yet audible sound, and for the first time in a long while, his eyes softened with contemplation. "We will see them together," he said finally, the weight of the decision evident in every syllable, and Emily felt a rush of relief and apprehension, knowing that the next step would push them both into uncharted territory. The envelope lay between them, a symbol of revelation and choice, and the hallway seemed to hold its breath, anticipating the moment they would cross the threshold and confront the consequences that had been quietly building, leaving both hearts suspended on the edge of uncertainty and hope. The mansion seemed to hold its breath as Tommy and Emily moved down the hallway, each step echoing like a drumbeat of anticipation, and the weight of their unspoken truths pressed down on them, thick and suffocating. Tommy's hand lingered near the doorknob, a subtle tremor betraying the storm of emotions within him, while Emily's heart raced so fast she could feel it pounding in her throat. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught the edges of the envelope on the table, casting a fleeting shimmer that felt almost like a warning, and Emily could not shake the feeling that every decision from this point onward would ripple in ways they could not control. She glanced at Tommy, seeing the intensity in his dark eyes, the tension coiled in his broad shoulders, and realized that the balance between them had shifted, a fragile thread of trust now intertwined with the risk of complete upheaval. As they approached the garden doors, the faint laughter of children drifted through the air, each sound striking her chest with a mixture of hope and dread. Tommy's gaze flicked toward the noise, and a flicker of fear passed across his face, quickly replaced by determination. "We cannot turn back now," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of command and vulnerability alike. Emily nodded, swallowing hard, feeling both the pressure and the strange reassurance of moving forward together. The polished floor reflected their movements, elongating shadows that seemed to echo the consequences awaiting them beyond the doors. Tommy paused for a brief moment, inhaling slowly, and Emily saw a tiny quiver in his jawline, a subtle fracture in his otherwise controlled exterior, and it made her pulse quicken, the emotional gravity of the moment tightening around them like a vice. She stepped closer, hands slightly trembling, and said quietly, "Sir, whatever we find, we face it together." His eyes softened for the briefest instant, a silent acknowledgement of their interdependence, before hardening again, the tension shifting into resolve. Just as he reached for the handle, a sudden movement in the garden caught both of their eyes, a figure stepping into the sunlight, small, hesitant, and unmistakably familiar. Emily gasped, a shiver running down her spine, and Tommy froze, the color draining slightly from his face as recognition and shock collided violently within him. The figure took another step, and the unmistakable resemblance to Tommy became painfully clear, forcing both of them to confront a reality that neither had fully prepared for, a truth so immediate and undeniable that the air itself seemed to crackle with the impending revelation. Tommy froze as the small figure in the sunlight stepped closer, each movement deliberate, fragile, yet unmistakably connected to him, and Emily's heart pounded in her chest, her hands clutching the edge of the railing as if it could anchor her to reality. The resemblance was undeniable, the features, the gestures, the very way the child held herself, all echoing Tommy's own expressions, and the weight of recognition slammed into him like a tidal wave. His breath hitched, sharp and audible, and for the first time in years, the carefully constructed armor of control cracked, revealing a raw vulnerability that Emily had never seen. She stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Sir, it is true, they are yours." And the words hung in the air, electrifying the space between them. Tommy's jaw clenched, a storm of emotions flashing across his face, shock, disbelief, longing, and an ache that seemed to twist deep within his chest. The sunlight glinted off his eyes, catching the turmoil and the dawning realization that the life he had built was on the precipice of change. Emily watched, heart aching, as he took a slow, heavy step toward the child, and then paused, torn between instinct and fear of the unknown, his eyes darting back to her in silent question. She nodded subtly, a mix of encouragement and warning, and he inhaled sharply, the muscles in his neck taut, as if preparing to confront a truth he had evaded for too long. The child, sensing the tension, took another tentative step, and Tommy's hand reached out instinctively, trembling slightly, a gesture of connection and surrender, and in that moment, the mansion seemed to hold its breath, the world narrowing to this fragile intersection of past and present. Emily felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of hope and fear, knowing that the next moments would determine not only the relationship between Tommy and the children, but the fragile trust forming between her and him. Tommy knelt slightly, bringing himself to the child's level, eyes glistening, and whispered a name, his voice raw, unsteady, carrying the weight of years lost and questions unasked. The child paused, gaze locking with his, and a flicker of recognition passed, subtle yet undeniable, igniting a tension so high that the air itself seemed to crackle. Emily's pulse raced, the silence stretching, every heartbeat amplified, and she realized that the next word, the next gesture, could either solidify a fragile connection or shatter it entirely. Tommy's eyes flicked to Emily, a silent plea for guidance, a question unspoken, and she nodded, a quiet affirmation that whatever happened, they would face it together. And then, just as he reached fully toward the child, the sound of a distant car horn blared sharply through the garden, startling them both, breaking the fragile moment, and Tommy's gaze snapped toward the gate, wide-eyed and tense, realizing that the world outside was moving faster than he had anticipated, and that their choices now carried consequences that could change everything in an instant. The sudden blare of the car horn snapped Tommy and Emily from the fragile connection they had just begun to build, and for a heartbeat, the garden seemed to shrink, the sunlight strobing across the grass as tension coursed through them both. Tommy's hand froze in midair, fingers inches from the child, and Emily could feel the tight coil of fear and uncertainty pressing into her chest, her breath catching as she realized how quickly moments of hope could unravel. The child glanced nervously toward the sound, small shoulders tensing, and Tommy's eyes darkened, a mixture of protectiveness and frustration flickering across his face, betraying the depth of his emotional investment. Emily took a careful step closer to him, her voice low and steady. "Sir, whatever comes, we must hold together." But the words seemed fragile against the mounting chaos of the moment. Tommy exhaled slowly, muscles still taut, and a shadow crossed his expression, a recognition that the world outside could intrude at any second, threatening the fragile trust forming between them. The envelope on the table gleamed in the sunlight, a reminder of the truths already revealed and the choices yet to be made, and Emily felt the weight of consequence pressing on her like a physical force. She swallowed hard, watching Tommy's gaze shift back to the child, eyes wide, reflecting fear, longing, and an aching desire to make right what had been lost. The wind stirred the curtains, and for a moment, the garden seemed suspended in time, the children's laughter a bittersweet echo that reminded them both of the lives dangling in the balance. Then, as if jolted by the intrusion, Tommy straightened abruptly, a surge of resolve rippling through his frame, and Emily felt a pulse of energy, a sudden tightening of stakes that left no room for hesitation. "We cannot wait," he said, voice firm, yet carrying a tremor of vulnerability, and Emily nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear and solidarity. They moved toward the child together, the polished floor reflecting their determined steps, shadows stretching and twisting with every heartbeat. The air seemed to thrum with possibility and danger, a fragile dance of connection and risk that neither could afford to misstep. As Tommy crouched slightly, reaching again toward the child, Emily sensed a profound shift within him, a willingness to embrace the unknown, and yet the distant echo of the car horn lingered, a reminder that their choices were no longer private, that every revelation carried consequences beyond the walls of the mansion. Her pulse quickened, tension rippling through her veins, and she realized that the fragile bond between them had already altered the landscape of trust, authority, and emotional dependence. The moment stretched, heavy and electric, each second dripping with anticipation and dread, and as Tommy's fingers hovered above the child's small hand, the garden gate creaked slowly, a sound that pulled both of their gazes outward, leaving the future uncertain, and the quiet hush that followed carried a promise of revelations yet to come. Tommy's hand hovered just above the child's, the sunlight catching his eyes in a way that revealed a vulnerability he rarely allowed, and Emily felt a rush of tension coil through her chest, each heartbeat echoing the gravity of the moment. The distant sound of the car horn had faded, but its echo lingered, a reminder that the outside world was pressing in, carrying consequences they could not yet see. Tommy's gaze flicked toward Emily, dark eyes searching for guidance, and in that instant, a subtle shift occurred, as if the control he had always wielded so effortlessly was now tempered by dependence on her judgment, her courage, and her insight. Emily took a deep, steadying breath, realizing that the delicate balance between them had begun to tilt, that the authority he commanded could now be influenced by her knowledge, her choices, and the truths she had uncovered. She stepped slightly closer, her voice soft but unwavering. "Sir, there's more you need to know before you make any decisions," and the words landed heavily in the sunlit garden, amplifying the suspense that had been building. Tommy's brow furrowed, the tension in his broad shoulders tight, and he leaned slightly toward her, the first acknowledgement that he was no longer fully in command of the narrative, that the revelation she carried could redefine the course of their lives. Emily's pulse quickened as she pulled the envelope closer, fingers brushing the edge, and she revealed the contents, layer by layer, letting the hidden truths unravel, each detail adding weight and reshaping the perception of who the children were, and how the past had secretly intertwined their fates. Tommy's eyes widened, disbelief mingling with a dawning understanding, and he stepped back, suddenly aware that the certainty he had clung to was dissolving, replaced by complexity and stakes he had not anticipated. The child looked between them, sensing the shift, small hands clutching at the grass, and Emily realized that the narrative of power, control, and secrecy was no longer solely his domain. For the first time, she held a measure of influence, a key to truths that could guide or devastate, and the realization surged through her like electricity, heightening both fear and determination. Tommy exhaled slowly, muscles relaxing then tightening, a flicker of admiration passing through his gaze, mixed with incredulity, as he processed that the control he had always assumed was absolute was now nuanced, fragile, and dependent on choices neither of them could fully predict. Emily's lips parted as she hesitated, and then quietly added, "There is someone else, someone you did not know about, who has been waiting for the right moment." And the words struck Tommy like a jolt, eyes widening, the air itself seeming to tense, because in that single revelation, everything they had understood about the past, the children, and the power he held shifted instantaneously, leaving both hearts suspended at the precipice of a new, uncertain reality that demanded immediate reckoning. The revelation hung in the air like a charged storm, and Tommy's chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath heavy with the weight of choices he had never anticipated, while Emily's fingers tightened around the envelope, knuckles white, heart racing as the enormity of the moment pressed down on them both. The garden seemed to shrink, shadows stretching long and jagged across the lawn, and the distant hum of the city beyond the gates served as a reminder that time was moving relentlessly forward, leaving no room for hesitation. Tommy's gaze darted between Emily and the child, the flicker of realization in his eyes growing more intense with every heartbeat, and he took a deliberate step closer, muscles coiled, his usual composure replaced by raw, undeniable urgency. Emily could feel the shift in power, the subtle transfer of control, and yet the responsibility weighed equally on her, the burden of truth and guidance threatening to overwhelm her senses. The child looked up, innocent eyes wide, sensing the tension, and Tommy's voice broke the silence, low and strained. "Emily, everything depends on what we do next." His words struck like a thunderclap, each syllable carrying the gravity of irreversible choice. Emily swallowed hard, the room spinning slightly as if the mansion itself held its breath, and she realized that the next action could redefine their lives forever, that hesitation or misstep could shatter the fragile thread of trust they had begun to weave. Tommy exhaled, a sharp, measured sound, and his hand hovered over the photograph, the edge of his fingers trembling ever so slightly, betraying the storm of emotions. Behind the steady exterior, the sunlight shifted suddenly, catching the envelope in a bright gleam, and Emily's mind raced, connecting the dots of all that had been revealed, all that had been hidden, and the potential consequences of exposing even more. She stepped closer, courage and fear colliding, whispering, "Sir, we cannot ignore the other truths, the ones that have been waiting." And her words pierced the tension, adding another layer of weight to the already strained atmosphere. Tommy's eyes darkened, scanning the garden, the mansion, and the child, realizing that the next step was a leap into uncertainty, a commitment to facing not just the present revelations but the full spectrum of hidden realities. The wind rustled the leaves, the children's laughter faint but sharp in the distance, and the world seemed to pause as both considered the impossible decisions ahead. Tommy's jaw tightened, and he exhaled slowly, deliberately, feeling the pull of duty, fear, and an unexpected hope coalescing into a pressure so intense that it threatened to break the fragile calm. Emily glanced at him, sensing the inner conflict, and the room pulsed with unspoken urgency, a rhythm that mirrored their quickening heartbeats. The final choice hovered before them, unmade, yet inevitable, the tension stretching taut like a drawn wire, and the air vibrated with the promise of revelation, sacrifice, and a moment that would irrevocably change everything as they stood poised on the brink of the next, unstoppable turn of events. Tommy finally lowered his hand, letting it rest gently near the child's small fingers, and a deep, almost imperceptible exhale escaped his lips, as if he had been holding the weight of the world within his chest for far too long. Emily watched, heart swelling and tightening simultaneously, as the tension that had gripped them for hours began to unravel, replaced by a fragile yet undeniable relief. The sunlight softened across the garden, casting long, golden streaks over the trio, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Tommy's shoulders relaxed, though his gaze remained intense, filled with a mixture of awe, lingering fear, and tentative hope. The child stepped forward slowly, eyes wide with curiosity and recognition, and Tommy's hand moved slightly to meet hers, careful, deliberate, and protective. Emily felt the pulse of the moment, the convergence of past secrets and present truths, and a deep sense of responsibility eased from her shoulders, knowing she had guided them to this delicate balance. Tommy's voice was low and measured, carrying a weight of finality and introspection. "I do not know how to undo the years lost, but I know now where I belong." And the words resonated through the still air, echoing the emotional journey they had endured together. Emily allowed herself a small, cautious smile, understanding that their roles had shifted, that trust had been built in the crucible of revelation, and that the invisible threads of connection would now guide their future choices. The child looked between them, sensing the depth of change, the newfound security radiating from Tommy, and Emily realized that the foundation of family, of belonging, had begun to form in the space where fear, uncertainty, and courage had collided. For a few moments the garden was quiet, the world outside seeming distant and inconsequential, as if it had paused to witness the emotional payoff of their shared ordeal. Tommy knelt slightly, bringing himself to the child's level once more, eyes softening, a subtle smile curving his lips, and Emily felt a surge of warmth and cautious optimism, a recognition that even amid secrets and past mistakes, connection and understanding could emerge. The envelope lay forgotten on the table, a symbol of the truths that had catalyzed change, now resting as a testament to the courage required to face difficult realities. As they lingered in that moment, sunlight shifting, shadows retreating, Emily felt a deep moral echo resonating within her, an enduring reminder that the truths we hold, the courage to reveal them, and the trust we place in one another shape the path toward redemption, connection, and the possibility of healing that no power or wealth could ever replace. The garden lay bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun, shadows stretching long across the lawn as Tommy stood quietly beside the child, a subtle shift in posture reflecting the heavy weight of realization and responsibility now settled upon him. Emily remained near, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, observing the delicate balance of connection that had emerged from the storm of truths and revelations, feeling both relief and the lingering echo of tension that had brought them here. Tommy's eyes traced the child's small movements, each glance and gesture embedding a profound understanding of what had been lost and what could now be nurtured, and he exhaled slowly, a quiet surrender to the vulnerability and courage that had guided him to this moment. The sunlight caught the edge of the photograph once more, glinting briefly, and Emily's gaze softened, realizing that the choices made, the risks taken, and the truths revealed had reshaped not only their relationships but their very sense of self and purpose. Tommy knelt slightly, bringing his eyes to the child's level, and for the first time, his voice carried a gentle authority, tempered by care, empathy, and reflection. "We will find our way together," he said, and the words resonated through the garden, bridging the space between fear, longing, and newfound trust. Emily felt the subtle weight of transformation in both of them, a recognition that their roles had shifted, that power and responsibility now intertwined with emotional dependence and mutual respect, creating a fragile yet enduring foundation for what lay ahead. The child reached a tentative hand toward Tommy, and he took it slowly, deliberately, the gesture carrying both reassurance and promise, and Emily felt her chest tighten with the mixture of hope, uncertainty, and quiet triumph. The mansion behind them seemed almost still, the echoes of prior revelations lingering in the polished halls, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the gravity of every choice, every hesitation, every leap of trust that had led to this fragile resolution. Tommy stood finally, the child's small hand still in his, and turned to Emily, a faint, grateful smile flickering across his features, acknowledging the courage and insight she had provided, and the silent sacrifices she had made in guiding them through this turning point. The air was calm, yet charged with the potential for future discoveries, and a soft breeze stirred the leaves, carrying a hint of something unresolved, a whisper of questions yet to be answered, choices yet to be faced, and moments yet to unfold. Emily exhaled gently, the tension easing but leaving a lingering awareness that the journey had irrevocably changed all of them, that every revelation and connection had a cost, and that the path forward, though illuminated with understanding and connection, still held shadows of uncertainty, hinting that their story was far from complete. The sun dipped lower, casting a warm, golden glow across the garden as Tommy, the child, and Emily stood together, the tension that had haunted them finally easing into a quiet, shared understanding. Tommy's gaze softened, the rigid lines of authority giving way to a tenderness born of revelation and acceptance, and he knelt once more to meet the child's eyes, offering a gentle smile that radiated reassurance and connection. Emily watched, chest swelling with a mixture of relief and pride, knowing that her courage to speak the truth had guided them to this moment, bridging past secrets with a new possibility for trust and unity. The child reached out freely, taking Tommy's hand without hesitation, and the simple gesture carried a depth of emotional payoff that echoed through the quiet air, a testament to resilience, forgiveness, and the bonds that had been forged through shared vulnerability. The mansion behind them seemed to settle, the polished floors and towering windows no longer merely a backdrop but silent witnesses to the transformations that had occurred, the walls holding memories of fear, hesitation, revelation, and now, reconciliation. Tommy straightened, eyes meeting Emily's with gratitude and quiet acknowledgement, a subtle shift in power and reliance that reflected a partnership founded on truth and courage rather than mere command. Emily felt a lightness in her chest, the release of tension mingling with the enduring awareness that life's complexities remained, but that they had faced them together, and that connection, once tentative and fragile, had solidified into something enduring. The child laughed softly, a sound that rippled through the garden like a bell of hope, and Tommy's lips curved in a rare, unguarded smile, eyes glimmering with the promise of presence and attentiveness. Emily exhaled, a long, gentle release, and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, sensing the completion of one chapter and the quiet promise of new beginnings. The shadows lengthened as the day drew toward evening, the golden light softening the edges of everything, and the three of them lingered in the gentle warmth, a tableau of reconciliation, growth, and the unexpected beauty of truth revealed. In that stillness, Emily realized the profound lesson of the journey, that courage to speak, the willingness to confront uncertainty, and the choice to trust could transform even the most guarded hearts. Tommy looked at the child, then at Emily, and with a soft, resolute voice, he said, "We move forward together." And the words carried the weight of experience, the depth of human connection, and the quiet power of redemption. The garden held them in its calm embrace, the distant hum of the city fading, and in the lingering light, the moral echoed clear and resonant: truth may challenge, courage may tremble, but only through honesty and trust can hearts find their rightful place.